So I will share quickly our agenda for today. So I'll do our introduction and spiritual grounding. And unfortunately, our colleague from Vote Solar was not able to join us. So I'll try to give us a quick introduction to some principles of solar equity. And then we'll have wonderful Christina Krost from Faith in Place and United Women in Faith member, share with us some of her work that she has done in Illinois. And then we'll go to a Q&A, and hopefully you'll be preparing your questions about how we can bring solar equity into our own communities, and pick Christina's brain on how we can do that in a very practical way. And then we'll be discussing also some opportunities for advocacy and some events that we have coming up. And then Doris will close us in prayer again. So shortly, we can go to our next slide. I wanted us to open with a short but sweet scripture verse, Ecclesiastes 1:4-7 of the New Revised Standard Version. And it says, "A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hurries to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Round and round goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full." If we can go back to the last slide still.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. But the sea is not full to the place where the stream flowed and where they continue to flow. Amen. And I really love the imagery here. I think it's a beautiful passage, which actually will be in very much of a contrast to the next slide. But I do think the following piece, it's also very practical, but having this imagery as a form of inspiration of the possibilities and the renewal of the earth, and the calling to call onto these possibilities and these gifts, also for our stewardship and for our benefit in renewable energies and all the different forms that we can take advantage of this beautiful gift. So the very practical and more technical piece that I wanted to share with you is that we have a resolution on it. As you know, we base our work on our book of social principles and resolutions. And this very practical one, I really appreciate this very practical resolution, very helpful on guiding us on what we can do as stewards of creation, and in terms of energy, what our responsibilities are, just as Doris was sharing. So I'll read just a few parts of it here with you. And part of our energy statement of resolution 1001 shares, "We will be models for energy conservation. United Methodists, including churches, annual conferences, general boards, and agencies, will model energy conservation by doing things as," and then share some examples: installing dampers in furnaces, insulating adequately all church properties, heating and lighting only rooms that are in use, using air circulation, purchasing energy efficient appliances, and exploring alternative energy sources such as solar energy. So very, very technical list of very small and perhaps some bigger examples of things we can do, but I appreciated how sometimes we need that reminder of some technical aspects of things we can do. And I think it's wonderful that we actually have a resolution about it that we can explore and get more guidance. And if we continue reading, it actually shares some programs that we can be involved in, including energy stewardship congregation and interfaith power and light programs, which we have the privilege to have Christina with us today, representing some of that work, and sharing about our shared values of justice and sustainability. So very practical resolution, and inviting you to go and check out some of the other parts that it mentions as well. So jumping into our solar equity part,
That reminds me of our special treat to later on in the announcements also. So I hope people stay tuned in. The different resolutions. Mhm,
thank you, Keisha, for that reminder.
mhm.
We'll bring it up for sure. So jumping into solar equity, again, um, unfortunately, our friend from Solar, Boat Solar, wasn't able to join us due to a medical emergency. But on our overall of quick, wanted to give you a quick overview of solar equity and some examples as well of resources that Boat Solar has shared with us in the past, as well as the equitable solar principles shared by NAACP, their social equity initiative, of which United Women in Faith has endorsed. And so if you're trying to, as we're trying to figure out what solar equity is, you may do some Google search, as I did, and we're not talking about shares here. So in case that was a question, is it equity about shares? That's not the type of equity that we're talking about here. Um, but if you're looking for different definitions, you might find a few sources, and we might start with trying to figure out what energy equity is. And so I wanted to share with you a few sources, some general entries. So we have a dictionary entry and another definition from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. And the font is a bit small. I recognize that, so I'll be reading them out for you. The first one reads, it evaluates the accessibility and affordability of energy within a country or region. So how affordable, how accessible it is. The Pacific Northwest National Laboratory says energy equity recognizes that disadvantaged communities have been historically marginalized and overburdened by pollution, underinvestment in clean energy infrastructure, and lack of access to energy efficient housing and transportation. An equitable energy system is one where the economic, health, and social benefits of participation extend to all levels of society, regardless of ability, race, or economic status. Achieving energy equity requires intentionally designing systems, technology, procedures, and policies that lead to the fair and just distribution of benefits in the energy system. So I think this remark, it's helpful because it not only gives us a general idea, but it also of what equity means, but also I think highlights or notes for us that it's not guaranteed. And it's by design, and it's a process that we need to engage on to guarantee or to work so that there's truly equity and justice within the energy system. And so there's many considerations that come in mind. And in the next slide, part of the presentation that we had in 2019 with Boat Solar, they had shared with us some general considerations, and perhaps there are a few more pieces that would have naturally come to mind, at least for me, when I think of energy equity, of solar equity. And so we see there net metering, affordable housing, community engagement, going a little bit deeper than perhaps just the direct connection between the producer and the consumer, but really looking at how the system is connected to our infrastructures and to different sectors as well of society. So I'm sharing it here, and just a few of the recommendations and what are aspects of things that we can look at to really think about it holistically. And I promise we will try to schedule another time where our members can speak directly to these items here more with specific examples, but just wanted to share them for now so that you had an idea of some of these considerations, as they might also be helpful as we're considering on how to engage with bringing or installing solar energy in our facilities and the idea of solar equity, right? And so now you might be asking, but why are we talking about solar today? And now there's a lot of great forms of renewable energy, but something that I wanted to share with you that might not be news to you, but it's an important fact. And if we go to the next slide, please, is that solar energy is actually the cheapest electricity that we've had in history. according to the International Energy Agency. So it's cheaper than coal and gas in most major countries. And this is a major win because that had been one of the challenges or the concerns that people had expressed for years. And we've seen the reduction in cost, but actually since 2020, solar has become, according in most countries, the cheapest form of energy, which is great news, right? Because we want to make sure that if we're thinking about sustainability, that we're addressing social, environmental, and also economic aspects of it. And it's definitely a great incentive to look more into solar. Another argument that I think it's important to hear, and I've started to hear more and more in different spaces, is in terms when we talk about energy resiliency, and coming from a place where we see our electricity. Just yesterday, actually, we didn't have electricity in our house because of the weather. We had some raining, and when we're talking about energy resiliency, the strength of microgrids for energy independence and the ability that solar provides to create those spaces is also a very interesting incentive as well. But now, whatever the renewable energy alternative that you're looking up for your community is a process, that you have to engage to what makes the most sense to your context. But we need to ensure that whatever the solution is, both the solution and the process are equitable and just. And as we say before, there's no 100% guarantees. So we have to put in the work of taking in all of these considerations in practice. And so I'll share a bit of the work that partners have done and that we've had the privilege to work with and partner with as well. So one of the partners that we've worked with before is the NAACP and their Solar Equity Initiative that was launched in 2018 to increase solar installations in communities of color, and also to connect these communities to more opportunities to skill trainings for solar related jobs, and also strengthen more policies for solar equity in these communities. So alongside that work, they develop in coalition a set of principles, the Equitable Solar Policy Principles in 2021, to help internal members of the coalition and partners and allies to have alignment on these issues. So align the organizations and also align the policymakers and give us some common understanding, common language of what equitable solar policies are. And so we endorse these principles, and I wanted to share them with you to kind of have as a foundation of what are the best practices, the recommended principles for solar equity. So I'll share this with you, and I'll be paraphrasing a little bit as I'm jumping through them. But hopefully at a later time, we can also have a more in-depth conversation about what are some examples of these principles. For now, I'll just read a few of them. Principle number 1 is to reflect an inclusive and community-driven theory of change. So this is guided by the principles of environmental justice and the GEMES principles of democratic organizing. These principles are also highlighted in the work that we as United Women in Faith do through our USCAN advocacy in all of our spaces. And they're very helpful if you ever want to read more about them. We'd love to follow up with you with more resources. Ruth had also just shared with me recently a link to this very same principle. So I was happy that they're being mainstreamed and used in our different organizing spaces. And basically what it means is, how do we go about coming together and creating effective change? How do we go about community organizing and talking to one another for change? So principle number 1, very important and very helpful resources there. Principle 2 is to address past, current, and future impacts of climate change by fostering the development of solar energy policies that move us towards resilient and just transition. Principle number 3 is that the result has to be measurable. So there has to be measurable improvements in solar adoption rates and strong consumer protections. And if we go to the next slide, principle number 4 also calls us for the increase, to increase and advocate for resilience. So very important principle to develop and to focus on when we're talking about energy. Principle number 5, be cross-cutting so that they address water quality, housing affordability, community development, clean air, workforce equity, and jobs, that they are also contracting inequity, and that they foster community economic development, education, food access, and affordability. And they're also helpful to transportation, utility regulation, community engagement, and other concerns. So that previous slide that we had shared with us, both solar and all the different considerations, these are even more considerations to it. And perhaps sometimes we don't see right away some of the connections that energy has to different areas and other justice issues, but energy is very intersectional. And so taking a look at how it connects and it's cross-cutting through all of these issues is very important to make sure that we're really building the resilient and just systems that we need. And then principle number 6, it needs to also be integrated with energy efficiency, with grid upgrades and other renewable energy sources, with good infrastructure in buildings, good facilities, and also thinking about how they can be integrated into our transportation system and transit electrification, also the issue of storage, right? So all of this are very important considerations, because even if we have great solar panels, if we don't have an efficient battery, it's not going to help us very much. If we don't have a grid that works for our needs, it's not going to help us the best possible. So we have to be thinking about all of this interconnected areas at the same time. And it's very important that as we advocate for one solution or another, that we don't overlook all the different aspects that need to be worked on as well. Then the final 2 principles, as this principles, they also need to drive, solar equity must also drive both economic and political benefits, meaning making energy more affordable, increasing ownership opportunities, creating jobs in the communities that are being used, especially historically marginalized communities, communities of color, support entrepreneurs and minority and women-owned businesses, foster the integration of an inclusive solar energy workforce. And then principle number 8, also strive for equitable, accessible solar. And they say net positive benefits, meaning benefits that it benefits the community more than the burdens, right? And that this benefits or burdens are not disproportionate to any group or region, that the process educates consumers and empowers them really to make their own and informed decisions, which is very important. And finally, that the companies involved and the organizations involved operate at the highest ethical standards and don't engage in deceptive or abusive practices, predatory lending, for example. So this is a quick, I apologize if I ran very fast, and I understand it's very heavy language. But basically what we want to do is really integrating all of these areas, naming them, which is important for us to really consider the aspects where we really need to work on ethical decisions, on building resiliency, on building capacity. And so with this overview, quick overview of the principles, and if you ask me, I think they're very comprehensive and they're very useful, and not only helpful in terms of us deciding how to go about installing energy, but really, I think they're very useful principles in looking into any forms of renewable energy and really how we want to implement them and go about this work. And so, as you're thinking and having in mind on, do we want to install solar in our homes, in our communities, in my congregation, and starting to have that conversation. If you're in that place right now, and that's one of the reasons that you're joining us today, well, it's your lucky day, because we actually are planning to share next week. We're partnering with Interfaith Power and Light Coalition and some interfaith partners and networks, also through USCAN, that can join us. You can join us for next week on February 21st for a webinar on how to plan the energy future of your congregation. So everything starts with a conversation, everything starts with an idea, right? And so you might be the person right now in your congregation that has that idea, that has that concern of what are we going to do? How can we, start some action into the energy transition ourselves, right? We can't wait to make that happen. We can take some action right now. Well, you have this event coming up, and thank you, Keisha, for sharing the link in the chat. And so we'll be discussing exactly on how to have this conversation and what are some helpful resources to have to help you have this conversation and to help us look at more examples of things that we can do, right? It's about installing solar. That's a wonderful opportunity. It's also about how do we pair that with other things that we can do, like having more insulation materials, right? So that we have to spend less energy as we're producing it. So a lot of really helpful considerations to be had. And so I look forward to seeing you next week. You can subscribe right now as I'm talking, or you can also subscribe later. We'll be sharing it on the chat. And if you're just very curious right now and you actually need an example right now, actually we're very lucky because we have the privilege to have Christina with us, Christina Cross, to share about how to make this same process, how she went through this same process in her own community, and the involvement of United Women in Faith. And so for those that are just meeting Christina now, she grew up in the suburban Detroit area, and she holds a Bachelor of Arts from Abingdon College, and she's also part of the Interfaith Power and Light network that we're partnering with. So we're very excited to have an expert like her with us today. She also taught in both public and private schools in Illinois and Michigan for 10 years before starting her ministry in creation justice. And in 2015, she joined Faith in Place to organize houses of worship around smart energy programs in central and southern Illinois. In addition to her work at Faith in Place, she is the former vice president of Illinois Great Rivers Conference United Women in Faith, formerly United Methodist Women, and chair of her conference's Church and Society Board, as well as deaconess candidate. She's married to her husband, Todd, and an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church, and she has 3 daughters, and her family lives in Mattoon, Illinois. So very happy, very excited to have you with us, Christina, and look forward to you telling us more about how we go about this process, what conversations we want to have, and how can United Women in Faith sisters come together to make this possible. Thank you, Christina. Leave it up to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Ilka. Let me share my screen. Give me 1 second, friends. Okay. Thumbs up if you can see that. Okay, thumbs up, great. Okay, so I think Ilka told you a little bit about me, but I see some familiar faces on here. I'm glad to see you all. I'm a clergy spouse in the Illinois Great Rivers Conference. I'm a deaconess candidate. I am a mom of 3 daughters. I'm a former Be Just Be Green jurisdiction guide. Some of you original folks will remember that program. So if you're in the North Central jurisdiction, we may have spoken before. But my day job is that I do policy work in Illinois around energy and other environmental things with Faith in Place, which is now the Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana affiliate of Interfaith Power and Light. So we're a 3-state org now, but I focus here in Illinois. And I want you to see the joy in this picture. I am standing on a ladder 2 stories up in the air. It's 25 degrees outside. The air hurts my face, but that smile there of mine is from 3 years of work that's culminating in a project that we're going to talk about today. And it's 3 of my loves coming together: United Women in Faith, Just Transition, and solar energy. So I'm very excited to talk to you about how all those things came together today. So this project came about because I had a dream in the early 2017, early 2018, that The national mission institutions in the Illinois Great Rivers Annual Conference, we have two. I wanted them both to have solar energy. I thought that that was something that was within our reach and within our scope to be able to do. And as of late January, that is actually now the case. We've achieved that goal. So I would love to talk to you about how that happened. So let me move to the next slide. If I can figure out how to do that. All right. So in Illinois, in 2016, with bipartisan support in a veto session in a November legislative session in Illinois, Illinois passed what's called the the Future Energy Jobs Act. So that's a little bit of background on how this all started in Illinois. It passed in 2016. It generated money for renewable energy investments, and it created a program called the Illinois Solar for All program. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that's all like here. So Illinois Solar for All was a program came out of the Future Energy Jobs Act 2016. But the point to provide access to renewable energy for income eligible communities, sometimes we hear that as low income communities, through incentives that help make solar more affordable. We were trying to make solar accessible to people who have been locked out of, access to having solar for a very long time. And this program helps people put solar on their homes, residential solar, helps build community solar projects. Now that's for folks who maybe don't own their home, who want to subscribe to get solar energy, and then they get offsets on their energy bills, but they don't actually get like solar panels on their house. And nonprofit and public facilities like churches, houses of worship, were eligible to get solar as well, as long as they fit some criteria. In the residential solar space, there are income requirements to be able to get a no-cost upfront solar installation in your home. In the nonprofit and public facilities space, if you are in what the EPA designates as a low-income community or as an environmental justice community, and there's a map tool to help you figure that out. Happy to show you how to do that later. You would be eligible for again, no cost upfront solar installation at your house of worship. The other thing that Solar for All is exciting to me, at least, is that it comes alongside and helps get solar in places that don't always get solar, but it also is working on training folks for the solar and wind industry, which are the fastest growing industries, certainly in Illinois and a lot of places in the country. And they want their trainees to be trained from these areas that, again, are often left behind. Areas that are environmental justice areas or, low income areas. These folks are often left behind when we transition. They're often the ones, too, that have been most impacted by this kind of pollution from fossil fuels. And so we wanted folks who are most impacted to be at the front of the line for the training. So this all comes together in the Illinois Solar for All program. So after the Future Energy Jobs Act was passed in 2016 and the Illinois Solar for All program was started, then we continued, we being a coalition of different environmental groups like the one I'm part of, but we call ourselves the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. After 2016 successes, we kept building and kept the momentum of our advocacy. And we tried and tried for several years to get a more robust clean energy bill passed. And that happened on September 15th, 2021, when our governor signed the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act into law. There's a lot to love about, we call it CEJA affectionately, but it puts Illinois on a path to 100% renewable energy by 2050, and helping build that clean energy workforce. And again, as you do that, you're just helping the economics of an area. And it also had some utility accountability issues. If you live in Illinois right now, you have some of the most expensive utility bills in the country right now. There are a number of reasons why that is. None of them are renewable energy, as some of our legislators will try to tell us. Happy to talk more about that offline if you'd like. But there's a perfect storm of issues happening in Illinois that is really affecting our utility bills. So this was holding utilities accountable and trying to help some of that for ratepayers. Let me go to the next slide. This may be hard for you to read on screen. There's some very little pieces here, but what the big picture of what I want you to see in this slide is that when the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act was being written, we took a map of the existing fossil fuel plants, coal plants and coal mines. So we took a map of all of the known, either retiring or recently retired or about to retire fossil fuel plants. And we said, if we want to transition to renewable energy in Illinois, we're going to need to help these communities first, because they're the ones that have workforces that are suffering from these closures. And we want the closures, we want the renewable energy, but it's not fair to, to these workers to then lose their jobs when we transition to this new kind of energy. So they took a map of where the existing fossil fuel plants are, and they said, we're going to locate some workforce, work training hubs in those communities, which I think was a pretty smart thing to do. So with the little, the reddish icons that you see there, there's 13 of them. Those are where it's written into the law that the workforce hubs will be located. They'll be set up by our state's Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. They are in the process of doing that right now. As you know, government is even slower than church often, and it takes time, and they're working through it. But the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, is committed to keeping them on task, making sure they're doing what they need to do, and that is a thing that I sit on calls all day, every day, watching this bill get implemented, the way that it needs to get implemented, the way that it's written. So there are plenty of people keeping eyes on this, and it still goes slow. But again, I just wanted to emphasize that the communities that are, most at risk and most impacted by the fossil fuel transition are the ones at the front of the line to get these workforce hubs and the job training. Next to that, too, comes wraparound services for these workforce hubs, business incubators, because we found that you can train a workforce to do a thing all day long, but if there's not jobs for them after they leave their workforce training, that's really difficult, right? What do you do? So there'll be business incubators that come on alongside that so that people can start hiring these trainees. And I'll talk about how that is a success story in just a second. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide. So this is just a map here, how I mentioned income eligible and environmental justice communities. So if you kind of sort of remember the map I just showed you of where all the fossil fuel plants were in Illinois and where the workforce hubs are, it matches pretty closely to the what we call the environmental justice communities. That's the map with the red dots on the left. And then if you look at the right-hand side map, that comes from our Illinois Solar for All website mapping tool. Those are all of the low income or income eligible communities in Illinois that are eligible for these programs. And if you kind of put one on top of the other, you'll see there's a lot of overlap there. Okay. So let's talk about some success that we've had here. So in 2021, one of our national mission institutions in the Illinois Great Rivers Conference, Cunningham Children's Home, built what's called the Noel Education Center. They built onto their facility a state-of-the-art learning center for the children that they serve at Cunningham. And so as they were doing that, again, it's a brand new building. As they were doing that, they thought, gee, what could we do to offset some of the costs of this building? And they found out that they were eligible for the program. Wish I could say that it was me that told them, but it was not. There were other grassroots organizations reaching out to them, other organizations that I work with very closely here in Illinois, that reached out to them and said, you'd be a great candidate to do this Illinois Solar for All program. And so they looked into it. And what it turns out is that for them, there was no upfront cost for this solar installation. They get a 30% savings on their energy bills for 7 years. After year 7, when they own the panels outright, which you have a 25 to 30-year life on these panels, so you still have a ton of life on the panels. After that 7-year period, they're going to own the panels outright, and they save 100% on their energy bills after that. This is a lot like what's called a power purchase agreement, where a investor puts panels on a building, on an office, on a, in a field somewhere like that, and takes the tax breaks, because the churches don't get tax breaks that the government gives you to go solar. And so there's a lease agreement worked out between the investor and the person who gets the panels. Usually it's about a 7-year period where you pay a small lease payment to the investor. The investor takes the tax breaks. After the period of time where the tax breaks expire, they don't need them. They basically sell them to you, but you've been paying for them all along. And then they're yours until they extend their life system. So many solar companies do these power purchase agreements, but I'll also give pause that there are some states that don't allow this kind of thing. So it may not be possible in your state. I will also say that with the IRA and with the infrastructure bill money, this is going to make solar a lot more accessible for places that maybe did not have the opportunity to have solar before. And I would really highly encourage you to attend the webinar that Ilka shared a little bit earlier. They're going to be sharing, how you can start to access the funds that are coming out through the federal government, coming up very soon. And there's some really critical steps you can take to get ready for that conversation at your house of worship, or to get ready to start applying for those funds as they start trickling down to the states. So I would highly encourage, if this is a conversation you're having at your house of worship, I would highly encourage you to attend that webinar. And I'll be on paying attention, as well, to see what I can share with houses of worship in Illinois that I'll be, that I work with. Okay, so that's what happened at Cunningham. So this all happened in about 2021. That's when they started their conversations, and everything was all wrapped up, installed, ready to go by 2022. So again, this is a project that takes about a year from start of the conversation to the final installation and the switch turns on. It does take about a year to complete. So inspired by the success that I saw at Cunningham Children's Home, I set my attention to Leslie Bates Davis Neighborhood House, the second national mission institution in Illinois that United Women in Faith helps to run. And this is a picture of one of their facilities. They have several throughout the East St. Louis community, but this is kind of where like their administrative work is done, and then some of their ministries happen through this building. But this is the original building that was built in the community in the late 1920s. And so I knew that Solar for All could work because Leslie Bates Davis Neighborhood House is located in an environmental justice community. They are in a low income or income eligible community, and I knew that they would qualify. So I started dreaming and thinking, and I started talking to our conference president, who I think I saw on this call, Susan Connor. I started maybe floating some ideas to the board members I knew at Leslie Bates Davis Neighborhood House. And I said, I think we could do this, and it could save them a lot of money. Think of all the ministry they could continue to do in East St. Louis if they weren't giving it to our utility company every month. And that got people thinking. So I used some of the influence that I had with our, Conference United Women in Faith to start talking to the board about what doing a project would look like. So I explained the project to them. I explained what the savings could potentially look like. And I started making some phone calls to installers. And I actually set up a committee with some of the people at Leslie Bates Davis Neighborhood House. I presented to the board. I started a committee. I talked to some of the facilities people there. And, we called a few installers to see, was anyone interested in coming out and talking to us about doing this project? And it turns out there were, several people interested in coming and talking to us about this project. There are several Solar for All projects that have happened in this community because, again, they qualify, under the income eligibilities and the environmental justice requirements. So it's an easy peasy, slam dunk project that they can do. I also have a long-term overarching goal of trying to discuss how a project like this saves the Leslie Bates Davis Neighborhood House money that can be put into mission in the community and not go to the utility company, but also this is cleaner air for their community. Again, they are an environmental justice community. They have multiple different kinds of manufacturing sites there and transportation hub sites there that really impacts the air quality. And so using clean energy in this neighborhood is helping be a good neighbor and cleaning up the air. It also shares a little bit of clean energy onto that grid around them. If there's a surplus of energy that they produce, that goes out to the neighborhood. And so that really does make, a real impact in the community. And also I wanted to bring an awareness to the fact that these are jobs that people can be trained to do and actually make a living doing it. And that's something that the Leslie Bates Davis Neighborhood House does. They help to point people to job training and workforce training. And so I wanted to highlight that this was totally something that they could, do. All right, so let's go to the next picture. So how did this happen? Well, these were the steps, and they were many, but we did get there on a little bit different timeline than I had initially thought. So in 2021, I applied for some funds through United Women in Faith through their Just Energy for All campaign to try to get a project done at Leslie Bates Davis Neighborhood House. Now, $2,500 was about the amount that I got, and that's not going to, pay for solar panels. What that paid for was my time and my travel to organize all of the things that I needed to organize to get this project done. There's a lot of following up and emails, and I've traveled out there a few times and I'll continue to do so. And so that covers my time and my travel and any other staff that helps me with that to do this project. Faith in Place, my employer, is already a Solar for All grassroots educator, so we're already doing this work throughout Illinois. This was just, a project that was near and dear to my heart that we're working on. So I presented to the Leslie Bates Davis Neighborhood House Board in the winter of 2021. And we had secured an installer after we did some, a little bit of committee work and a little bit of research in spring of 2021. And as we were about to sign a contract in June of 2021, it was decided that they wanted to pause. Things were going a little too fast. There were some questions that still needed to be answered. There was a little bit of concern and worry. And so they decided we're going to stop. We're not going to do this. We're not going to sign the contract. And though that was very frustrating for me, it was an understandable pause that needed to be taken, and that the board had some questions they wanted answered, and the executive director had some questions that needed to be answered. So we paused and let a little bit of time go by and got some questions answered, circled up again with the installers, did some of the conversations and the listening that needed to happen, and we pressed on. So again, came back to the board in 2022. And this contract was signed last summer in June of 2022. The award was given from the state program in, I believe, like August of 2022. So we found out from the state that we were receiving the funds to do this project. And so the installation began in January of 2023. And that silly picture of me standing on a ladder was, again, a very proud day for me to see, the hard work that was done by the board, for so many years, and the persistence of folks that thought this was really important, all coming to fruition. We'll be planning some kind of a dedication ceremony, I hope, in spring of 2023, where we'll bring some of our local elected officials to come and see, some of the community leaders to come and see, maybe even our bishop to come and see what we're up to at Leslie Bates Davis Neighborhood House and how we're providing justice and equity, in a solar transition for East St. Louis, Illinois. All right, let's go to the next slide. So I wanted to show you some pictures, just kind of briefly, of what Leslie Bates Davis is all about. So here's a picture on the roof. You can even see the St. Louis Arch if you look carefully there in the background. That's how close it is to St. Louis, but it's on the Illinois side, not on the Missouri side. And it's in a pretty it at one time would have been a very busy, bustling neighborhood, and is now, fairly empty, and pretty economically depressed. And so Leslie Bates Davis is in a very critical place in the East St. Louis community. But I really want to talk about these gentlemen right here, who are some of the installers on this project. These gentlemen were trained through the Solar for All trainings that came through the FEJA law back in 2016. They were trained up in Peoria, Illinois, which is way far north of East St. Louis. But these gentlemen were trained through this equity program that the state ran, and they are absolutely working hard, making a living, supporting their families, doing this work through this training that the state has provided. They travel all over the state to do these projects. So wouldn't it be great if there had been a workforce already in East St. Louis that could have done this project just in their own backyards, so our friends in Peoria can go be doing projects in Peoria and not have to be traveling all over the state. When I spoke to them, they were just so proud that the work that they were doing was giving back to a community that really needed it, and giving back to a organization that did so much good in the community. And it was just so heartwarming to see, everything coming full circle, in this program. All right, so let's get the next slide. So here's what I've learned through this project. I'm wrapping it up here. I learned that these kind of projects, we call it moving at the speed of church, especially when you're dealing with government programs. It goes even slower. So you need to be persistent. You need to keep working. You need to keep sending follow-up emails and follow-up phone calls and checking in with people and making sure everybody's on the same page. It takes time. It takes effort. That's part of why, having a little grant funding for my time to do this work really is what made this project happen. So being persistent was very important. And I'm certain that anyone who works at Leslie Bates Davis Neighborhood House is probably tired of hearing from me about this project. Bring in experts and get multiple perspectives. It may take meeting with more than one installer to find one that really fits with the project that you're trying to do. We want to make sure we're centering equity and justice in a project like this, but saving money is not a bad thing either. So sometimes we have to bring a project, bring up when we're trying to talk to people about, hey, let's try this thing. You may open with, it's going to save you money, but you close with, oh, and also it will uplift this community. And then make and use your connections. Make sure that you're talking to all of the people and all of the stakeholders and all of the, using all the connections you have to make this work. And I believe that is the last slide that I have. But I will leave you with my email address there if you have questions, and my cell phone number if you have questions. And I'll refer you back here to Faith in Place if you have questions about how to do this in Illinois or outside of Illinois. We can maybe try to connect you with folks that can help you. So that was all that I had.
Thank you so much, Christina. I really appreciate your leadership and the example that you wrote of this. I was familiar with the story, but it was great to hear more of the process of it. And I think it's very refreshing, and I appreciated the valuable lessons of bringing different perspectives, as well as centering and equity. And it was also great to see that it was, as many you raised there, it was not a linear process. Sometimes we had to pause and rethink and negotiate and ask who else needs to be invited on the table. So I think those are very, very valuable lessons, and I appreciate also that you took that initiative and that project and that idea and try to share it, those best practices that were first learned in the first project, then take them on and share them at the Leslie Bates Davis Neighborhood House. I think that's very helpful and very appreciated. of your work for that. Now I'm gonna ask Keisha. I can go on and ask you more questions, but I see that there was a lot of comments in the chat, so I think people are very excited to ask you questions. And I'll go ahead and let Keisha, if she can walk us through some of the questions that we had. I see that some people already answer each other in the chat, but maybe we would want to acknowledge some of them, and I'll also let you read through some of them if you're interested.
Yes, so some of the questions that came through in the chat during the presentation, Judy asked, what are the jobs that are being offered to replace fossil fuel related jobs?
Sure. So certainly in Illinois, we are still a coal mine state, coal production state. We're also an oil and gas production state. And so this is deeply important here. So when people hear that we are transitioning from fossil fuel energy to renewable energy, they know right away that this is going to be, a big impact to their job, right? So what I like to tell people, and I've lived in Southern Illinois in a town that had a coal mine. I mean, I know exactly what I'm talking about here. I've watched how neighborhoods have really been just devastated by mines closing, and that's been happening for decades before this transition to renewable energy. That's not recent. That's been going on for decades, since the 80s and the 90s, due to mechanizing these mines. But it has an impact, a deep impact on these communities. So I like to tell people that if you transition to renewable energy jobs in solar and in wind, the skills that you have really transfer. It is a similar skill set, and you could be providing energy. You can continue to provide energy as you have, and maybe your grandparents did. Again, in these coal mining and oil and gas producing places, it's a proud heritage that they have. We have generations of people who have worked in this industry. You could be producing energy just in a different way, just in a new way. And that seems to help. So solar and wind is definitely an area that we train folks in Illinois. But the other really big piece of this is energy efficiency. We like to train folks up to see how to, replace roofs and replace windows, and to do the insulation, and just doing energy audits, changing the lighting, all of those parts. Energy efficiency is just as big of a piece in this as transitioning rapidly to solar and wind. And so we also train up folks in the energy efficiency space too. I hope that answered your question.
There were some answers in the chat, because one of the other questions was about what rare minerals are required in construction of solar panels. And there was a list of a few, and then yes, the comments are coming through about what the effects of that are, and are they harmful, and so on, if you're able to address that.
I'm certainly no expert in addressing that, but I will say this, that I have a child who has asthma. I know what air quality does and how it impacts her in where I live. I live in, we have oil and gas extraction in my town. There is a natural gas well not far from her high school. And I have taken her to urgent care not once, but twice in the past 2 weeks because her breathing has been impacted. That's a cost to my family. That is a cost to my workday and my time. That is an emotional cost to our family. And, she has to take quite a bit of medication to be able to just breathe normally on a given day. I know what the impact of fossil fuel extraction and burning for energy is. And I'm not saying that one thing should be, we shouldn't be considering that, things can be rough, right? I'm not considering that. I'm not even saying that we should replace one extractive technology with another. I'm saying that they're not exactly equal. It's not really an equal trade-off that we're talking about here. But these things do need to be considered, as things that we consider if it's a good idea or not. But I will tell you that doing nothing and is not an option here either.
Okay. Thank you. And yes, anyone, I guess, can answer this if there are people who are able to. Ilka, Marianne had asked if we can give the website, of the Energy Stewardship Congregation listed in the slide where you had the holistic diagram. So I was going to try and look for that, but we'll keep working on that. Here's another one. When panels are damaged and they need replacement, how are they disposed of? So that was another one from Judy, and Tracy mentioned that Dallas has a solar panel recycling plant. So if there are some more resources that people know of, that would be nice to share out loud or in the chat.
Sure. As we transition to these new forms of energy, we're going to see new kinds of industries develop as well, right? So repairing solar panels, repairing wind turbines, these are new industries that we can train people up in, right? And recycling these things will become industries as well. So as that scales up, we're going to need workers to be able to do that. So there are places that are already doing some of this work. We've just not quite hit the scale yet where it is, widespread in all communities. I mean, speaking of recycling, I live in a community where we have none. I throw out most of my recyclables because there is no recycling where I live. So these are areas of opportunity for jobs and for training and for industry to come in, and economic drivers that could help, with this new kind of green economy that we're looking for. So I think all of these things are way more recyclable. We can't recycle oil and gas. We can't recycle, fossil fuels, but solar panels, wind turbines, things like that absolutely could have a second life. And these are industries that are growing.
Thank you, Christina. And as someone had brought it up in chat, I was also researching them, and they say they also put them to a second use of reusing them, repurposing them altogether as they are for other purposes where they're if their efficiency went down, they're not as required to 100%, and they're still useful in that matter. But going back to also the question on minerals, I think it's important that regardless of what renewable energy sourcing we're looking at, that we use these principles of equity and ask ourselves those questions. We don't shy away from them, but I think it's important to also put them in the perspective, because for so long we didn't ask these questions from oil and gas, and we just assumed it and normalized it as a normal, right? And so really putting them into perspective, and in terms of going into this renewable sources and different forms of batteries and what they required, doing that work, advocating for those resources, while alongside working especially with the communities where these minerals are coming from. A lot of them are coming from indigenous communities where they have these rare minerals. So alongside our advocacy, our transition, working with this community so that they're fairly compensated, so that they're informed, so they're consulted, they're in the decision-making table, in really having a fair process for it. Also very important work. So thank you all for bringing those considerations. And very curious about that map you mentioned, Christina, of the EJ map. If you want to later share it at some point, very helpful too as well.
Yep, I can drop the link in the chat. Just give me a minute to find it.
In the meantime, I know earlier in the chat there was a comment about native lands, when we usually have people put their name out in the native land that you're on. The comment was that native lands are not always accurate. Being on Miami land, the local history and the local people may not be the white native lands. And I think the goal in asking that during our sessions is to acknowledge the people's land that it was before it was called Miami or prior to that. So we acknowledge that, yes, the land has traded many hands. So I wanted to make sure I brought that up from the chat. And thank you for all of the comments and resources that are being dropped in the chat as we speak right now. Thank you, Christina. I know one of the other questions that has come through also while you were answering about being able to reuse the solar panels is what is the general cost of replacing solar panels? Yeah.
I think that varies widely depending on the size of your system, the kind of system that you have. There is no like one-to-one correspondence of if you spent this much, you'll spend this much. I'll tell you that any project you ever do gets expensive over time, right? So, you know, if you started a solar project today, it's always going to be more expensive 5 years later, 10 years later, you know, down the road. Costs are always increasing, right? But I don't exactly know what the cost to replace is. I do know that, you know, a solar installation will last you between 25 and 30 years. The savings that you will see from your utility bills in that amount of time, if you steward it well, could be invested, you know, into the next version of the solar system in the next iteration in the next 30 years. Typically, you'll need to replace a roof at some point, you know, in between an installation. You know, again, you only get about what, 30, maybe longer years on a roof. So, you know, there are definitely costs, and houses of worship are always looking at those costs, right? And trying to identify sources and things like that. The good news about those kinds of costs and efficiency and upgrades that you can do there, funds from the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act are funds from that will be can be used for houses of worship to make some of those upgrades before you try to go solar. If you need a new roof, if you need new windows, if you need insulation, if those things have been identified in an energy audit, those would be allowable things that you can apply for grant funding to do those things with that money. So some of those costs can be, you know, you can find other sources of funding other than, you know, capital campaigns at your church. So again, I would really highly suggest you, if you are in these kinds of conversations at your house of worship right now, attending that webinar that we talked about earlier. It's going to focus heavily on the things that you can do to be ready. So when those funds come through, you're ready to go. And that looks like energy audits and benchmarking what you've already done and measuring the efficiencies that you can find. The cheapest energy is the energy that doesn't have to be produced in the first place, because we're as efficient as we can be at our building, right? So I would invite you to try to find those efficiencies first before we try to, you know, launch into solar and wind projects.
Thank you. We're moving close to our next time for next steps. And so there are definitely more comments and questions as expected in the chat. One of which is this recorded and will it be available? And yes, it is being recorded and the slides will be available to the people who registered at the email address you registered with. So I'll pass it to you, Ilka.
Thank you, Keisha. And thank you so much, Christina, for answering all our questions and recognizing that Illinois might have different policies than the rest of the states. I think it's important. I think you gave us really good tips on what to look out in states, in our particular states and cities. The model as well of investment was really interesting that you shared on how some companies can use a tax incentive to actually help the organizations that are interested, the nonprofit organizations that are interested in taking advantage of installing renewable energy or energy efficiency installations in their facilities. So thank you for all of those. And I'm just going to share some few next steps and things that we can do right now in our advocacy to help us get started and take some action together. So our first advocacy call for today. We can go to the next slide, please.
Getting there. Got it.
Thank you. So we want to continue doing our Healthy Air and Healthcare postcard campaign. This is a campaign that we've worked on for the last couple of years, and many of you have participated already, sending postcard letters to your governors and your senators. And these postcards are still available, and they have been refreshed with new language and new graphics. So if you have a couple of seconds to use your phone, if you have it with us, you can scan that QR code right now, and we would also be posting it on the chat if you would like to click there. And if you're with your phone, you can open your camera and point at the QR code, press where it is, and link might be popping out for you to open in your browser and take a look at those resources. You can print. There's a bookmark there where you can go to the different print options and visuals, and you can print whichever makes sense that you want to use, either a single one or multiple ones if you want to share with friends, and submit that, send those letters to your governors and senators. We also have a link to do that online. So thank you, everyone, for participating in our campaign and continuing to do so. As we know, healthy air is definitely a priority in our communities, and it's a very important issue because it really speaks to us as members of our communities, as mothers, as daughters. I think health is very personal to our lives. And so having this as the focus and reminder of why we do the work that we do, it's also very important. So thank you, everyone, for taking care of that. And another call to action that we have is our soot pollution standard testimony, and I'll let Keisha share a little bit about that.
Sure. Yes, it definitely goes along the lines of with the healthy air, and the EPA now has actions and is calling for people to testify about soot. And for those who are not aware, soot is a dangerous and funny word to pronounce. So there is definitely a longer way that it is referred to as. Soot is dangerous and a deadly pollutant that is produced by power plants, tailpipes on cars and trucks, and other industrial sources. It threatens our health and environment, posing particular risks for children, seniors, and people with chronic illnesses. So the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA as we know it, has proposed a new soot protection standards to improve our air quality, advance environmental justice, and protect our health. So we are asking for people, if you are interested in testifying, or on another note, learning how to testify, or provide comments about the suit, please write suit in the chat. And if your name is properly your name, it'll show as your name. I will put that reminder in the chat, and we can follow up with you on giving you talking points or learning how to testify. We have a member on with us who will be helping us with that also. But we'd like to, put more of our social work into action, and it will be good to have people learn how to testify and give comment and testify on this suit action.
Thank
put
you,
that in the
Keisha.
chat. Absolutely.
And I believe Phyllis, who just wrote on the chat, is actually one that has signed up for us to testify. So thank you, Phyllis, again, and welcoming others to join us as well and share those practices. So in the next slide, we talked about already the event that we will have next week, the Planning the Energy Future for our congregations. Oh, sorry, different slide.
Oopsie.
It's okay. So for the, I can talk on the support for climate change. So part of our advocacy is doing domestic work, but also doing work at the international level, especially in terms of climate finance, doing our fair share of our climate responsibilities. And so we have this call to action to ask Congress for efficient plans to reduce our emissions domestically, and also support appropriate climate finance at the international level to meet our commitments and contributions, and also for the loss and damage fund that was recently implemented during the last COP. And we were there in Sharm el Sheikh, and the last minute that we did advocacy with communities, and so it's very important that now that it has been passed, that we come together and galvanize to really put funds in those so that it can really go to the countries that need it the most and have the least means to cope with the climate crisis, especially those that have been contributed the least to the climate crisis, yet are suffering some of the worst impacts. So very important call to action. And again, if you have your phone, you can use it right now to click on the QR code or use the camera to open it up, or also it's in the chat, and we'll be happy to also provide more information if you have any questions about it. And so I think now we have the event coming up. Great. So we already told you about this event next week. And thank you everyone that joined us for the last webinar that we partner with IPL and EESI and other interfaith networks. And so for this next webinar, it will be exactly about what we presented today, how to have this conversation of planning the energy future for congregations, as we already say. And it's very good. We have experts that have been doing this work for a number of years, and that can give us really good insights into how to go through this processes, what conversation to have, how to look into the auditing process, what does that mean, and how to go engage with benchmarking things that we perhaps are already doing. Perhaps a lot of our congregations have already been installing or doing solar or other energy efficiency materials or infrastructure in your congregations. So very important tool, and it's not only for the congregations, but it can be used also in support of other nonprofit organizations that are part of your community. So if perhaps you already have that done, that had checked in your congregation, you can actually help sponsor it or work in a coalition to find some facilities, some organization that can be an opportunity for them instead. And so encourage you to attend next week, and you have the link in the chat as well, and also a QR code there if you would like to sign up right now on your phone. It only takes a couple of seconds. And as the last fun part, we just wanted to share with you a calendar that was made by Dottie Hawkins, and we just wanted to say thank you to Dottie in New Mexico that shared this calendar event with you. And you might not be able to see everything, but if you saw our email earlier and clicked on it, you might be familiar with it. She gives us some wonderful activities that we can do every day as we're in this period of Lenten, to kind of strengthen and do more, engaging more climate justice advocacy, so that we have some intentionality going into Lenten, and really help us put our faith into action in a very practical manner. So loving those examples, and very appreciative. If you have more resources like that, we would love to get them and share them widely, because it's great to hear from you and the things that you're all doing all across the States. So thank you, Dottie, for those. And then in terms of our programming, as you know, we are moving into having our webinars every other month. And so our next webinar will be April 18, and our working group will be up to come. And I think we have a slide there with and the next dates. We're looking into March 8th or 7th. We're setting on some dates, and we'll be following up with more information. And our next Just Energy for All will be April 19th, 3 p.m. Eastern time. And then these are the next 2023 sessions for the next year. And now I'm gonna ask, I think that's all the highlights and next steps that we have for now. So I'm gonna ask Doris to please close us all in prayer.
Join me in prayer. Gracious and merciful Creator of all, may we feel your love surround us and our entire world and universe. Empower us for the work you have set before us. Give us courage in the face of resistance to change. Give us voices as individuals and as groups to go forward, speaking truth and offering alternatives to those who would seek to drown out our words. Give each of us the grace and the peace to take action in the fight for climate justice, not only as advocates, but also as mighty doers. Lord God, even as we ask for your guidance in this climate crisis, we also ask for your spirit of love and strength to the people in physical crisis the world over, for our sisters and brothers, and especially for the children of Ukraine and of Turkey and Syria who are suffering so badly. We, united women in faith, lift them up to you and your care. Thank you for your loving care and your blessings. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Doris. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We're really appreciative of your engagement and your very important questions that you bring. And yeah, just very happy to see you all as always. And I look forward to connecting with you later. Because we want to practice and go a little bit deeper into how do we implement what we learn in the webinars. That's what we're taking longer periods until our next webinar so that we can actually have some time in between to take some action. So I hope all of you can join us for our next working group session where we're going to discuss perhaps some projects that are already ongoing on solar equity in our respective communities, or for people that have questions and want to get started, we can also discuss more of those.